The United States Department of Justice has Utah's voter registration rolls. The lieutenant governor says they will likely want to check to see if there any illegal immigrants have voted. Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson said this is likely happening in every state, and the information they have handed over is publicly available, but the DOJ has asked for more.
There has to be a lawful purpose behind giving out this private data, driver's license numbers, the last four digits of your social security number, your birth date, things like that we typically don't just hand out willy-nilly.
I mean, willy-nilly, right? And as a voter, I don't want my information handed out willy-nilly. And we actually have on the line with us Derek Monson. He's from the Sutherland Institute, and he wrote an op-ed in Utah News Dispatch that just says Utah and every other state should protect elections by saying no to the Trump DOJ. Welcome, Derek. Are you okay? Thanks for joining us. Look, I was really captured by your arguments in this article about why states should not release this information. And I'm wondering if you could just start with some of the reasons right off the top.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I think the first thing to keep in mind, right, is we all care about election security and election integrity. So that's really not at debate here. You know, this isn't a question of being secure or not being. One side wants to be secure, one side not. But as we go about election security, the way we do it matters. And when, for instance, we gather all voter information from voter rolls and put them into one central database, we're making it easier for potential fraudsters who want to influence, say, a national election to get everyone's voter information. And that's actually weakening election security. And, you know, our system is actually based on dispersing responsibility and information in elections across local, state, and federal governments, which makes it really complicated to commit election fraud and maintains the integrity of our elections. So we should protect that. And what the Department of Justice is doing is kind of counter to that.
Can you tell our listeners, Derek, just exactly what the Department of Justice is doing and what their end game seems to be?
Yeah, well, in the letters they're communicating to states, they're saying that they're wanting to enforce the Help America Vote Act, which requires the maintenance of voter rolls, so that people who shouldn't be on voter rolls are not there, whether they've moved, maybe they've died, they shouldn't be in the first place, that kind of thing. And a lot of what they're asking for is very pertinent to that. They're asking states to share what processes and procedures they have in place to maintain voter rolls, and that makes a lot of sense. But then they're going beyond that to ask, we also want all your list of your voter roll list. And that has a lot of private information on it, like Lieutenant Governor was noting. And so the question is raised, why do you need that to ensure that our processes and procedures protect the maintenance and the integrity of our voter rolls? And so there's a question as to whether it's actually pertinent to what they're trying to do.
So is there an indication from the DOJ on why they want this expanded information?
You know, it's been pretty vague, and that's been one of the reasons I think why it's been a little bit of a controversial thing. Anytime a big federal agency comes and wants to gather all of our data, you know, we should be a little cautious. And in fact, there are federal laws in place that require certain hurdles to be overcome for any agency doing that, even when they're gathering public information. It's the Federal Privacy Act of 1974, and they have to make a public comment process whenever they're gathering data like this, and that's another thing in this case that has not been done. And so it does raise that question, why are they doing this, and why are they not following the procedures that federal law requires?
Yeah, Derek, my father used to say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And it seems like we're doing things pretty well here in Utah. I don't know what the DOJ expects us to do differently.
I think that's generally right. I mean, of course, we all need there's checks and balances in government for a reason. We all need people making sure we're doing the right thing. And that's why I think the Department of Justice asking for processes and procedures and how we maintain voter rolls is valid. But yes, we are doing really well. So do we need to give our private voter information to the federal government for a reason they haven't quite made clear? I don't think so.
So I'm going to ask you a political question. You probably could have guessed it's coming. So some of the arguments that I've heard is, well, election fraud, right? So Utah has election fraud, which, I mean, if you're the DOJ, we voted for President Trump and we elected supermajority Republican legislators. I'm not sure what fraud they're talking about, but I'm wondering if you could speak to the political aspect that seems to really be the foundation of this.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of concern out there that elections might have some fraud involved. And frankly, that's a healthy kind of thing to worry about so that we don't get lapse on things and, that fraud doesn't actually come about. But what there isn't a lot of is concrete evidence of fraud happening. There are a lot of stories that you might hear from people out there saying, ballots got delivered inappropriately here, or a friend or relative of mine got a ballot they shouldn't have. But all of those stories have one thing in common, and that's typically that no fraud actually happened because of that story, because the person caught it who's telling you the story. And so it's actually a sign that our system is doing well in terms of catching potential voter fraud. And so, yeah, there really isn't a lot of fraud out there, but the politics are what they are, and there's a lot of people who have concern about it. And the question is, do we act on that concern in a way that unintentionally undermines election integrity, or do we actually use it as a healthy opportunity to check and just make sure we're closing any gaps that exist and taking additional steps to maintain secure elections?
Derek, in my law practice, if the Department of Justice asks you for something, you provide it. You seem to imply here that it's a request and that the states can opt out of this compliance. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not an attorney, but I've read some what seems to be pretty sound and credible legal analysis that states are not required to give this information, and that when they've been taken to court over it, the courts have ruled in their favor when it comes to private information on voter rolls. And so I don't think it's something that's mandated. I think it's something that is within the jurisdiction of states, at least when it comes to private voter information. And so I think they're well within their constitutional authority and legal rights to say no. And in fact, one attorney I read commenting on this said that states who give this information, since the Department of Justice didn't go through the kind of approval process that way, there may be liability on the state side for divulging this information because they did follow the right process and procedures, and now you're kind of becoming a part of that if you do divulge the private voter roll information. So on a lot of grounds, I think it's safe for states to say no to this request.
So one final question, Derek. Is there anything that Sutherland Institute has talked about or written about specific to Utah's election and how voters can make sure or do as much as they can to make sure that their information is staying protected?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is to go and check the voter rolls. Make sure that you can contact your county clerk, make sure they have your information accurate and things. And of course, if you move or if something like, you relocate, whether it's in-state or out-of-state, the biggest thing you can do is make sure to change your voter registration. That will maintain the integrity of your information in the right place in your voting jurisdiction.
Thanks, Derek. That was Derek Monson, Chief Growth Officer for the Sutherland Institute. I don't know. What do you think about that? I mean, I understand what he's saying. Just say no.
Yeah.
I don't know where our lieutenant governor is on this, and we should ask her.
Well, she said it just in the sound clip we played at the beginning that there's publicly available information on voter rolls. We've talked about that. If you go to campaign, you've got access as a candidate to some of the information on voter rolls. But as a candidate, I can't access people's driver's license, right? And if you have this expanded information, I really liked Derek's point where he said instead of having 50 state databases for, bad actors to access, they could literally go to one central database and hack into the information of every single person in the United States that's registered to vote.
Right. If
it was all centralized, right? That there can be some real reasons for separation of the federal government and state government. So I agree with what Sutherland is saying here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to Derek.
Yeah, that was interesting. Driver's license, Social Security, and date of birth, and other personal information.